The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest enclosed space ever built by intelligent life. It floated at the heart of Nexus Prime, a station world that served as neutral ground for 847 member species. The hall could hold representatives from every known civilization, and today it was nearly full. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the petitioner's platform, a small circle of light in the center of the vast chamber. She was 63 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of difficult years. Her formal suit was simple and dark. She carried no weapons, wore no jewelry, and displayed none of the elaborate decorations that other species use to show their importance. She looked utterly unremarkable. That was intentional. Around her, rising in endless tiers toward a ceiling lost in shadow, sat the representatives of galactic civilization. Some were massive, armored beings that could crush a human with one limb. Others were clouds of gas contained in special chambers. A few were so strange that human eyes could barely understand what they were seeing. All of them were looking at her with expressions that ranged from boredom to open contempt. The Korvathi speaker, an ancient being with silver blue skin and forearms folded across his chest, activated the translation systems. His voice echoed through the chamber in 1,000 languages simultaneously. The Council recognizes the petition of the human species for full membership status. Ambassador Vasquez, you may present your species' contribution to galactic stability. Elena stepped forward. Thank you, Speaker. Humanity is honored to address this assembly. For 12 years, we have served as provisional members of... Laughter erupted from the Vorthax section. The sound was harsh and barking, like stones grinding together. The Vorthak were massive reptilian creatures, each one standing 3 meters tall with scales like black iron and teeth designed for tearing flesh. They had conquered 40 star systems and destroyed 2 species entirely. They were feared throughout the galaxy. Their lead delegate, a scarred veteran named Krathvol, rose to his feet. I apologize, Speaker. I simply cannot contain my amusement. The prey animals wish to be taken seriously. More laughter spread through the chamber. The Kralith, insectoid beings with razor-sharp limbs, clicked their mandibles in what passed for their kind of humor. The Selvari, creatures made of living crystal, chimed in frequencies that conveyed mockery. Elena stood perfectly still. Her expression did not change. Krathvol continued, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Look at this creature. Soft skin that tears at the slightest touch. No claws, no venom, no natural armor. They come from a world so hostile that it should have killed them 1,000 times over. Yet somehow they stumbled into space. And now they want to sit among true powers? The Kralith delegate rose next. Her voice was a series of clicks translated into common speech. The human lifespan is barely a century. Some of us in this chamber are older than their entire civilization. What wisdom can such mayflies offer? Their world is a gravity prison, added the Omnith representative. A being of compressed gas floating in a containment sphere. They evolved at the bottom of an atmosphere so thick it would crush most sensible life. Perhaps this explains why their brains work so slowly. The mockery continued for several minutes. Species that had never agreed on anything found common ground in their contempt for humanity. The Dravani, elegant beings of light, suggested that humans had simply gotten lucky, finding faster-than-light travel. The Molketh, living stone creatures, wondered aloud how humans had not been conquered already. Through all of it, Elena Vasquez stood silent. Her hands remained at her sides. Her breathing stayed calm. Her eyes moved slowly across the chamber, noting every delegate who laughed, every species that joined the ridicule. She was not angry. She was remembering. Finally, the Korvathi speaker raised one of his 4 hands. The chamber fell quiet. He looked down at Elena with something that might have been pity. Ambassador Vasquez, I apologize for the disruption. The Council values all perspectives, even those of younger species. Please continue your presentation. I am certain it will be most charming. The word hung in the air like an insult. Elena looked up at the speaker. For the first time, she smiled. It was a small expression, barely touching her lips, but something about it made a few delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Thank you, Speaker. I had prepared remarks, several hours of them, actually. Economic projections, cultural analyses, detailed proposals for how humanity might contribute to council operations. She paused. The chamber waited. But I think a demonstration would be more effective. With your permission, Speaker, I would like to show the Council what humanity truly offers. The Speaker waved one hand in casual dismissal. By all means, Ambassador, demonstrate away. Several delegates settled back in their seats, preparing for more entertainment. The Vorthik were already whispering among themselves, ready with more jokes. Elena raised her right hand. She extended a single finger toward the ceiling, and she held it there. For a moment, nothing happened. A few delegates laughed again, thinking this was some primitive human gesture they did not understand. Then the lights flickered. Every display screen in the Grand Assembly Hall activated simultaneously. The darkness above was suddenly filled with images, floating in the air above the petitioner's platform, visible from every angle of the vast chamber. The images showed ships, human ships, thousands of them. The laughter stopped. The displays showed 17 different locations scattered across the galaxy, strategic points that any military mind would recognize instantly. Jump nexuses, resource centers, the approaches to major homeworlds. And at each location, a human fleet waited in perfect formation. The ships were unlike anything the Council had seen before. They were sleek and dark, designed with a purpose that went beyond mere function. They bristled with weapons that Council scientists would not be able to identify. They moved with a coordination that spoke of training far beyond anything provisional members should possess. The Vorthak delegate was on his feet, his scales rippling with fury. This is a trick. Human ships number in the hundreds, not thousands. Our intelligence confirms... Your intelligence confirms what we wanted you to see, Elena said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. The ships in our official registry are decoys, training vessels using deliberately inferior technology. The real fleet has been waiting for quite some time. The numbers scrolled across the displays. 12,000 combat-ready vessels. Crew complements in the millions. Supply lines stretching back to facilities that Council sensors had somehow never detected. The Kralith delegates' mandibles clicked rapidly. This is impossible. Humans have only had faster-than-light capability for 60 years. They could not have built such a force. Elena lowered her hand slightly but kept her finger extended. The displays shifted, showing timelines and dates. Humanity discovered that intelligent life existed in this galaxy 47 years before our official first contact, she said. We intercepted your transmissions. We decoded your languages. We studied your technologies, your politics, your history. She turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. We watched the Vorthak conquer the Milesian people. We watched the Kralith consume the soft ones of Dendril Nafor. We watched 17 species disappear from the galaxy, victims of conquest, exploitation, or simple neglect. Her voice never rose, but it carried to every corner of the vast hall. We watched this council debate while innocence died. We watched members vote for inaction because action was inconvenient. We saw exactly what kind of galaxy this was. She smiled again, and this time there was no warmth in it at all. And we prepared accordingly. The Korvathi speaker had gone pale, his silver-blue skin fading to gray. Ambassador Vasquez, are you threatening this council? Elena shook her head. No, Speaker, I am educating it. For 12 years, you have seen exactly what we wanted you to see. A young species, naive and weak, grateful to be allowed into your great civilization. We played the role perfectly. She gestured, and the fleet displays vanished. In their place appeared a single document, text scrolling in every major language of the Council. This is humanity's actual petition. We are not asking for membership. We are asking for justice. The document outline demands that made several delegates gasp. Formal investigations into the Milesian genocide, reparations for the soft ones, accountability for every species that had gone extinct while the Council watched. The Selvari delegate, a being of pale pink crystal, spoke into the stunned silence. And if the Council refuses these demands? Elena lowered her hand at last. The displays faded. The chamber was left in normal light, but somehow it felt darker than before. Then I raise a different finger, she said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing the Grand Assembly Hall had ever contained. The Corvati speaker looked at Ambassador Elena Vasquez as if seeing her for the first time. She was still the same gray-haired woman who had walked onto the platform an hour ago. She still wore the same simple suit. She still carried no visible weapons. But nothing about her seemed unremarkable anymore. "This council will recess for 72 hours, the speaker announced, his voice unsteady, to consider the petition before us." As delegates began to file out, many casting fearful looks at the small human woman below, Elena remained on the platform. She had waited 47 years for this moment. She could wait a little longer. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity really was, and it would never look at them the same way again. The Grand Assembly Hall had never known chaos like this. Delegates shouted in 100 different languages. Some demanded immediate war against humanity. Others called for emergency sessions, for military assessments, for anything that might explain how this had happened. Ambassador Elena Vasquez remained on the petitioner's platform, watching it all with patient eyes. The Vorthak delegate, Krathvol, pushed his way through the crowd until he stood at the edge of the platform. His scales had darkened to almost pure black, a sign of extreme aggression in his species. His voice was a low growl that the translation systems barely captured. "You think your hidden fleet frightens us, human? The Vorthak have crushed empires older than your species. We have bathed in the blood of 1,000 worlds. Your tricks and toys mean nothing." Elena looked up at him without fear. "I think you should be frightened, delegate, not of our fleet, but of what its existence means." "And what does it mean?" "It means you never knew us at all. For 12 years you laughed at us. You called us prey animals, mayflies, soft-skinned fools. And for 12 years we let you believe it." She tilted her head slightly. "What else might you have missed?" Krathvol's claws extended, razor-sharp weapons that could slice through starship hulls. "Threaten me again, human, and I will tear you apart where you stand." "You could," Elena agreed. "And then my finger would not rise at all. The signal would simply stop, and 17 fleets would begin moving, with no further negotiation possible." The Vorthak froze. Around them, other delegates had stopped to listen. Elena continued in the same calm voice. "You see, delegate, I am not particularly important. I am not a leader or a general or a decision-maker. I am simply a messenger. My job is to stand here and give the council a chance to make the right choice. If I die, that chance dies with me." She smiled pleasantly. "So by all means, tear me apart. My species has already prepared for that outcome." Krathvol stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and stormed away, his guards falling in around him. Elena watched him go without comment. The Corvathi speaker approached the platform. He moved slowly, his forearms hanging loose at his sides. Up close, Elena could see how ancient he truly was. His silver-blue skin was marked with patterns that only appeared after centuries of life. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "may I speak with you privately?" Elena nodded and followed him through a side passage into a small chamber behind the main hall. The walls were lined with records of council proceedings, going back thousands of years. The weight of history pressed down on them. The speaker lowered himself into a chair that adjusted to his form. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For underestimating your species, for laughing along with the others, even if only in my heart." He closed his large eyes briefly. "And for other sins, much older than today." Elena remained standing. "You remember the Milesians?" It was not a question. The speaker opened his eyes. "I was young when the Vorthak came for them, barely 3 centuries old. I had just been appointed to the council as a junior observer. I watched the debates, the arguments, the endless procedures while the Milesians begged for help." His voice grew heavier. "I voted against intervention. I told myself it was too dangerous, too costly, too complicated. I told myself the Milesians would find a way to survive on their own. And then they were gone. And I never had to face what I had done." He looked at Elena with eyes full of ancient grief. "Until now." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You are not alone in your guilt, speaker. Most of this council has blood on its hands. The question is what happens next." "What do you want, Ambassador? Truly?" "Justice," she said simply. "Accountability. A galaxy where the strong cannot simply devour the weak, while everyone else watches. The speaker shook his head slowly. You ask for the impossible. The powers that benefit from the current system will never accept such changes. The Vorthak alone would rather burn the galaxy than admit they were wrong. I know, Elena said. That is why we prepared for so long. She sat down across from him, and for the first time since arriving at Nexus Prime, she allowed herself to look tired. Let me tell you a story, speaker, about how humanity really prepared for the galaxy. 47 years ago, a young officer named Elena Vasquez had been assigned to a classified project called Operation Quiet Sky. The project's purpose was simple: monitor deep space for any signs of intelligent life. What they found was terrifying. Signals from across the galaxy spoke of war, conquest, and extinction. Species rose and fell like waves on an ocean. The strong took what they wanted and the weak disappeared. There was a council that claimed to maintain order, but its order was the order of the powerful. The humans who first decoded these signals faced a terrible choice. They could announce their presence and hope for the best, or they could hide and prepare. They chose to prepare. For nearly 5 decades, humanity had lived a double life. On the surface, they were exactly what the galaxy expected: a young species, making mistakes, learning slowly, grateful for any scraps of knowledge their betters chose to share. Beneath the surface, they were building an empire of shadows, hidden shipyards in the dark spaces between stars, research facilities buried in the hearts of asteroids, training programs that turned ordinary humans into soldiers capable of fighting any species in the galaxy, intelligence networks that reached into every corner of known space. And through it all, a doctrine that was taught to every human who learned the truth: overwhelming mercy. We have the power to destroy, Elena told the speaker. Every analysis we ran, every simulation we tested, showed the same result. If we revealed ourselves and fought, we would win. Not easily, not quickly, but in the end, humanity would stand victorious over the ashes of galactic civilization. She leaned forward, and we decided that victory was not worth having, not if it meant becoming the very thing we feared. The speaker stared at her. You could have conquered us all, and you chose not to. We chose to wait, to watch, to hope that somehow the galaxy would change on its own. Elena's voice grew heavy. It did not change. The conquest continued. The extinctions continued. The council continued to do nothing. So why reveal yourselves now? Because we found something. Something that made waiting impossible. Before Elena could explain further, an alarm sounded. Emergency signals flashed across the walls of the small chamber. The speaker's personal display activated, showing a priority message from Council security. The Vorthak had dispatched an attack fleet toward Earth. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she did not look surprised or afraid. She looked almost sad. Speaker, I would like you to do something for me. What? Make sure the Council is watching the live feeds from Vorthak space. All of them. Every delegate, every observer, every being with access to a display screen. The speaker hesitated. Why? Because they need to see what happens next. The Vorthak fleet was impressive by any standard. 200 warships, each one capable of devastating a planet. They moved through space in perfect formation, their commanders confident in their overwhelming power. They had crushed species with far more impressive defenses. These soft-skinned humans would learn what happened to prey animals that forgot their place. The fleet arrived at the designated coordinates and found nothing. Empty space, just as their scouts had reported. Earth's pathetic defense force was days away. The path to humanity's homeworld was clear, and then the space around them came alive. Human ships appeared from nowhere. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. They emerged from hidden positions, from stealth fields that Vorthak technology could not detect, from dimensions that Vorthak science said did not exist. In seconds, the Vorthak fleet was completely surrounded. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 9 minutes. Human weapons were precise beyond anything the Vorthak had ever seen. Beams of energy struck exactly where they were aimed, disabling engines and weapons without touching crew compartments. Gravity fields locked ships in place, unable to flee or fight. Electronic warfare systems turned Vorthak computers into useless metal. Not a single Vorthax ship was destroyed. Every vessel was disabled with surgical precision. Every crew member was left alive, floating helplessly in the dark between stars. The message was clear. Humanity could have killed them all. They chose not to. In the small chamber behind the Grand Assembly Hall, Elena Vasquez and the Corvathi speaker watched the battle unfold on the display screens. When it was over, Elena spoke softly. We call it overwhelming mercy. We have the power to end any threat. We use that power to neutralize threats without destroying them, because we remember what extinction feels like. The speaker turned to look at her. What do you mean? Humanity nearly destroyed itself a dozen times before we ever reached the stars. Nuclear weapons, climate collapse, engineered plagues. We came within hours of ending our own species. Elena's voice was steady, but her eyes held old pain. We know what it is to face the end of everything. We swore that we would never inflict that fate on others, not even our enemies. The display showed Vorthax ships drifting helplessly, their crews alive but utterly defeated. The Vorthax fleet will be returned to their territory, Elena continued. Their crews will be unharmed. They will remember this day, and they will know that humanity showed them mercy when mercy was not required. The speaker was silent for a long time. Finally, he asked, What happens now, Ambassador? Elena stood. Now we return to the council. The vote on accountability must proceed. But I suspect the margins will be different than they would have been an hour ago. She walked toward the door, then paused. Speaker, I want you to understand something. Humanity does not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want to replace the Vorthax or become the next great power that everyone fears. We want something far more difficult than that. What? We want the galaxy to be better than it is, and we are willing to fight for that dream, but only as long as necessary. Only until others are ready to stand beside us. She left him sitting in that room surrounded by the records of 10,000 years of galactic history, all of it built on a foundation of conquest and fear. For the first time in centuries, the Corvathi speaker wondered if something different was possible. The 72 hours following the Vorthax defeat were the most chaotic in council history. Delegates rushed between meetings. Emergency communications flooded every channel. Species that had not spoken to each other in centuries suddenly found reasons to talk. Ambassador Elena Vasquez spent most of that time in her small quarters on Nexus Prime. She ate simple meals, reviewed reports from Earth, and waited. She had done her part. Now the galaxy had to decide what kind of future it wanted. The Council had split into three factions. The first faction, led by the Vorthax and their allies, demanded war. They argued that humanity's deception was an act of aggression that could not go unpunished. Better to fight now, they said, than to let these humans grow even stronger. The second faction, larger but less organized, wanted peace at any cost. They would give humanity whatever it asked for, agree to any terms, do anything to avoid conflict. Fear drove them, pure and simple. The third faction was the smallest, but it was growing. These were the delegates who had watched the battlefields closely. They had seen Vorthax ships disabled without a single death. They had heard Elena speak about overwhelming mercy, and they were beginning to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, the humans might be telling the truth about their intentions. The Selvari delegate was one of the leaders of this third faction. Her name was Crystalline Voice of Morning, and she was ancient even by her species standards. Her body was made of pink crystal that caught the light in beautiful patterns. She had seen empires rise and fall, and she was tired of watching the same patterns repeat. She requested a private meeting with Ambassador Vasquez. Elena agreed. They met in a garden chamber on one of the upper levels of Nexus Prime. Plants from 100 worlds grew here, tended by automated systems that had kept them alive for thousands of years. It was a place of peace in a station filled with fear. Crystalline Voice of Morning settled onto a stone bench that had been shaped for her form. Elena sat across from her on a simple chair. Ambassador, the Selvari began, I have questions that I could not ask in the council chamber. May I speak freely? Please. Your species claims to want justice. You claim to have the power to destroy, but choose mercy instead. These are beautiful words. The crystal being's voice chimed like bells. But how can we trust them? How do we know this is not simply a longer game, a slower conquest? Elena nodded. A fair question. Let me answer it with another question. When the Vorthak fleet attacked, what would you have done in our place? I would have destroyed them, crystalline voice of morning admitted. They came to kill your people. They showed no mercy to the Milesians. Why should you show mercy to them? Because if we destroyed them, we would become what we claim to oppose. We would prove that the only law in this galaxy is strength, and the only response to violence is more violence. Elena leaned forward. The Vorthak soldiers in those ships are not evil. They were following orders, believing what their leaders told them about us. They are victims of the same system we are trying to change. The Selvari was quiet for a moment. The Milesians were our allies once, long ago. We traded with them, shared knowledge with them, called them friends. When the Vorthak came, we did nothing. We told ourselves it was not our concern. We were wrong. Many species made that choice, Elena said gently. Yes, and most of us have spent centuries pretending it never happened. The crystal being's form seemed to dim slightly. Your arrival has forced us to remember. Some of us are grateful for that. Others hate you for it. We expected as much. What do you expect now? Surely you know the Council will not vote for your accountability measures. The powers that benefit from the current system will never accept such changes. Elena smiled. We expect exactly what will happen. A vote that fails, but by a smaller margin than anyone predicted. A crack in the foundations of how this galaxy has always worked. It is not victory, but it is a beginning. Crystalline voice of morning studied the human ambassador. In her long life, she had met countless diplomats from countless species. Most of them wanted power, wealth, territory, advantage. This human seemed to want something different, something that was almost impossible to believe. The Vorthak are already calling for your blood, she said. Their fleet was humiliated. Their warriors were left alive to spread the tale of their defeat. They will never forgive this. We know. They will attack again, with more ships, more weapons, more fury. We know. And you will show them mercy again? As many times as necessary. Elena's voice was firm. Until they understand that our mercy is not weakness. Until they realize that destroying us will cost more than they are willing to pay. Until they accept that there might be another way to exist in this galaxy. The Selvari delegate rose from her bench. Her crystalline form caught the light from the garden's artificial sun, throwing rainbows across the plants around them. Ambassador, I am going to do something I have not done in 3,000 years. I am going to take a risk. What kind of risk? I am going to believe you. She moved toward the door, then paused. When the vote comes, the Selvari will stand with humanity, not because we are afraid of your fleet, but because you might actually be what you claim to be. And if there is even a small chance of that, it is worth any risk. The council reconvened the next day. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed beyond capacity. Species that rarely attended full sessions had sent delegations. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The Korvathi speaker called for order. His voice was steadier than it had been 3 days ago. He had spent the intervening time thinking, and he had made his own decision about what kind of future he wanted. The council will now vote on the petition submitted by the human delegation. The petition calls for formal investigations into historical actions by member species against non-member or extinct species. It calls for reparations where appropriate and accountability for those found responsible. The Vorthak delegate rose immediately. This petition is an insult to every sovereign species in this chamber. It demands that we judge ourselves by the standards of prey animals who hid in the dark and built weapons behind our backs. I call for immediate rejection. Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the chamber. The Selvari delegate rose next. I call for support of the petition, not because I fear human weapons, but because for too long, this council has ignored its own failures. We watched species die and did nothing. Perhaps it is time we face that truth. The chamber fell silent. The Selvari were ancient, respected, powerful. Their opinion carried weight that few species could match. The debate continued for hours. Species rose to speak for and against, offering arguments that ranged from principled to cynical to terrified. Through it all, Ambassador Vasquez sat quietly, watching and listening. Finally, The speaker called for the vote. It failed. The petition did not receive the majority needed for passage. The Vorthak and their allies cheered, believing they had won. But Elena had been watching the numbers, and she saw what others missed. The vote had been closer than anyone expected. Nearly 40% of the council had voted in favor of accountability. 40% had chosen to challenge the way things had always been. It was not enough, but it was far more than zero. The speaker announced the result with a neutral voice, but when his eyes met Elena's across the chamber, she saw understanding there. He knew what this vote meant. He knew that something had changed. The Vorthak delegate stood again, his voice triumphant. The council has spoken. The human petition is rejected. Now I call for a vote on sanctions against the human species for their deception and their unprovoked attack on a Vorthak fleet. Before anyone could respond, Elena raised her hand. Her single finger pointed toward the ceiling. The chamber went absolutely still. I expected this outcome, Elena said calmly. We hope for better, but we planned for this, and so we have an alternative to propose. The display screens activated throughout the chamber, but this time they did not show fleets or weapons. They showed coordinates, locations scattered across the galaxy that no council record mentioned. These are the positions of 12 hidden human stations, Elena continued. They have been operating in secret for almost 2 centuries, and they contain something that will change this debate entirely. The Vorthak delegate snarled. More tricks? More human deception? No, delegate. The truth. Elena's voice softened. We would like to introduce you to some old friends. She lowered her finger, and the screens changed again. Now they showed faces, beings that every delegate in the chamber recognized, even though they should have been impossible. The Milesians, alive, not all of them. Not the millions who had once lived on their beautiful homeworld, but thousands of them, gathered in a human station, looking into the cameras with expressions that mixed hope and fear, and something that might have been defiance. The chamber exploded into chaos. Elena stood at the center of it all, watching the delegates react to the impossible. The Vorthak were screaming that it was a lie, a fabrication, a human trick. The Selvari were weeping in their own crystalline way. The Korvathi speaker had gone completely pale, and on the screens, a Milesian elder stepped forward. She was old and frail, her blue skin marked with the scars of a life spent in hiding, but her voice was strong. I remember the burning of Malesia. I remember the Vorthak ships in our skies. I remember the screams of my family as they died. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was steady. And I remember the human ship that found us in the darkness. The ship that saved 30,000 of us and hid us from the galaxy. The humans gave us something no one else offered. She looked directly into the camera, directly at the council that had abandoned her people. They gave us hope, and now they have given us a voice. Elena let the chaos continue for another moment. Then she spoke, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. The Milesians are not the only ones. We found survivors of 12 species that this galaxy believed were extinct. We saved them, hid them, and protected them for 2 centuries. And now they are ready to speak. She turned to face the Vorthak delegate directly. So, Delegate Krathvol, shall we discuss accountability again? Or would you prefer to explain to the council how the Milesians are somehow a human fabrication? For the first time since the summit began, the Vorthak had nothing to say. The Grand Assembly Hall had become something it had never been before, a place of testimony. For 3 days, survivors of extinct species appeared on the screens above the petitioner's platform. They told their stories. They named their dead. They looked into the eyes of the delegates who had done nothing while their worlds burned. The Milesian elder was the first. Her name was Sarah Vell, and she was 173 years old. She had been a child when the Vorthak came, young enough to be hidden in the emergency shelters that her parents hoped would save at least some of their people. The shelters had not been enough. The Vorthak were thorough, but a human ship had arrived in the darkness after the conquest was complete. Its crew had risked everything to search the ruins of Malesia for survivors. They had found Saravel and 30,000 others hiding in the deep places of their dying world. The humans asked nothing of us, Saravel told the council. They gave us shelter, food, medicine, hope. They built us a new home among the stars and kept our location secret from everyone. They said they were waiting for the right moment to reveal us. She paused, her ancient eyes scanning the chamber, full of species that had once called her people friends. I understand now why they waited. They wanted us to return to a galaxy that might actually welcome us, a galaxy that might have changed. Her voice grew hard. Looking at this council, I wonder if they were too optimistic. The soft ones of Dendril before spoke next. They were gentle beings, their bodies made of a substance that was part flesh and part plant. The Kralith had considered them a delicacy. Their extinction had been less a war than a harvest, but 7,000 of them still lived in a human station, far from any traveled space lane. Their representative, a being called Gentle Root in Darkness, appeared on the screens with leaves trembling in what might have been fear or anger. We did not know the word for what the Kralith did to us, Gentle Root in Darkness said. We had no concept of one thinking species consuming another. When the ships came, we thought they were visitors. We welcomed them with open branches. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The humans taught us the word. Genocide. They taught us many things. How to hide, how to fight if we must, how to survive in a galaxy that would eat us if it could. They did not ask us to become something we were not. They only asked us to live. Species after species testified. The Kathrani, beings of living sound who had been silenced by the Omnith. The void swimmers, creatures of deep space who had been hunted by the Dravani for their valuable organs. The crystal singers of Modus 7, destroyed by the Selvari themselves in a war so old that most current delegates had never heard of it. Crystalline Voice of Morning listened to the crystal singers, with her form dimmed almost to darkness. When their testimony ended, she rose. What they say is true, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 18,000 years ago, my people made war on the crystal singers. We called it self-defense. We called it necessary. We called it many things to help ourselves sleep at night. She looked at the survivors on the screen. We were wrong, and I am sorry. It was the first time any delegate had apologized. After the testimonies, Ambassador Vasquez requested permission to address the council. The speaker granted it immediately. Elena walked to the center of the platform. She looked tired. The past week had taken its toll on her, just as it had taken its toll on everyone. I want to explain something, she began. You have asked why humanity did this. Why we spent 2 centuries hiding survivors, building secret stations, preparing for this moment. The answer is simpler than you might think. She turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. Humanity's first contact was not with the Galactic Council. It was with a dying Milesian ship. The screen showed an image, a battered vessel drifting in deep space, its hull scarred by weapons fire, its life support failing. 47 years before our official first contact, human scientists detected this ship entering our solar system. It was not headed for Earth. It was simply dying in the void, and our system happened to be nearby. The image changed to show the interior of the ship. Milesian refugees, wounded and starving, huddled in compartments that had lost most of their air. We saved them. We learned their language. We heard their stories. Elena's voice grew heavy. They told us everything, about the Vorthak conquest, about the Council's inaction, about a galaxy where the strong devoured the weak while civilization watched and did nothing. She paused, letting the words sink in. We were terrified. Here was proof that we were not alone in the universe. And the first thing we learned was that the universe would kill us if it could. We could have hidden. We could have built walls around our solar system and hoped no one ever found us. The screen showed human ships, the early versions that had eventually become the Hidden Fleet. Instead, we made a choice. We decided that if the galaxy was full of predators and prey, we would be something different. We would be protectors. We would find the survivors and shelter them. We would build our strength in secret. And someday, when we were ready, we would offer the galaxy a different path. Elena gestured, and the screen showed all 12 hidden stations, each one home to a species that should have been extinct. This is what humanity chose to do with 47 years of hidden preparation. Not conquest, not empire, sanctuary. The Vorthak delegate rose. His voice was quieter than before, but it still carried venom. Pretty words, human, but you still deceived us. You still built a fleet capable of destroying any species in this chamber. How do we know you will not turn that fleet against us someday? Elena met his gaze without flinching. You do not know. You cannot know. Just as we could not know, 47 years ago, whether the galaxy would ever be ready for change. We took a risk on hope. Now we are asking you to take the same risk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. It was unremarkable, just a communications unit like any other. This device can send one signal. That signal will order the complete withdrawal of all human military forces from Council space. Our fleets will return to human territory. Our stations will lower their shields. We will trust in the galaxy's goodwill, with no guarantee that goodwill exists. The chamber went utterly silent. I am prepared to send that signal today, right now. All I ask in return is one thing. The Korvathi speaker leaned forward. What do you ask, Ambassador? A vote, not on accountability, not on punishment, not on anything that has come before. A new vote on a new proposal. Elena held up the device. I propose that this council officially recognize the survivor species as member civilizations with full rights and protections. The Milesians, the soft ones, the crystal singers, all of them. Give them a voice in this chamber. Let them speak for themselves. The Vorthak delegates snarled. You would give voting rights to species we conquered? Species that by every tradition of this galaxy belong to us? They belong to no one but themselves, Elena said firmly. That is the point. The speaker called for a recess to consider the proposal. Delegates scattered throughout the station, arguing and debating, and trying to understand what this vote would mean. Crystalline voice of morning found Elena in the garden chamber again. The human ambassador was standing by a window that looked out into the stars. You are taking an enormous risk, the Selvari said. If you withdraw your fleets and the vote fails, you will have no leverage left. The Vorthak could attack Earth itself. I know. Then why offer it? Elena turned to face her. Because we cannot force the galaxy to be better. We can show it what better looks like. We can demonstrate that trust is possible. But in the end, the choice has to be yours. All of yours. She looked back at the stars. My grandmother was one of the scientists who first decoded the Milesian language. She spent her entire life working on Operation Quiet Sky, preparing for a future she knew she would never see. Before she died, she told me something I have never forgotten. What did she say? She said that the measure of a species is not what it does with absolute power, but what it does with absolute trust. Power is easy. Trust is hard. Elena smiled sadly. We have shown what humanity does with power. Now we need to show what we do with trust. The vote was held the next morning. The proposal to recognize the survivor species as full members passed with a margin of 63%. It was not unanimous. The Vorthak and their closest allies voted against it, as expected. But enough species had been moved by the testimonies, by humanity's offer, by the simple idea that maybe things could be different. When the result was announced, Elena kept her promise. She activated the device and sent the withdrawal order. Human fleets across the galaxy began returning to home territory. The Milesian elder, Saravel, appeared on the screens one final time. She looked at the chamber full of species that had finally acknowledged her people's right to exist. For 2 centuries, we lived in hiding, she said. For 2 centuries, we dreamed of this moment. We did not know if it would ever come. Her voice cracked slightly. Thank you, not for your votes, but for your willingness to change. It is more than we ever dared to hope for. The council session ended, but everyone knew that something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy would never be quite the same again. And somewhere in the vast chamber, a gray-haired human ambassador allowed herself to weep for the first time in years. 3 years had passed since the day Elena Vasquez lifted her finger and changed the galaxy. The Grand Assembly Hall looked different now. New sections had been added to accommodate the survivor species who had finally taken their rightful places among the stars. The Milesians sat in a section decorated with blue crystals that reminded them of their lost homeworld. The soft ones had a garden section where they could stretch their roots between sessions. The crystal singers filled their corner with harmonic resonances that made the air itself feel alive. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the speaker's podium. She was no longer an ambassador. The Reformed Council had elected her as Secretary General, a position that had never existed before. She had accepted only after the survivor species had personally requested her. Today was a special session. The Milesians were being formally recognized as a sovereign member, species with full voting rights. It was a ceremony that had been repeated 11 times over the past 3 years, but this one felt different. The Milesians had been the first species humanity saved. Their recognition felt like a completion. Sarah Vell, now the Milesian ambassador, walked slowly to the petitioner's platform. She was older than she had been 3 years ago, her blue skin showing the marks of advanced age, but her voice was still strong. "I have lived long enough to see impossible things," she began. "I saw my world burn. I saw my people scattered like dust on the solar wind. I lived in hiding for more than a century, believing that we would die in darkness and no one would ever know we had existed." She paused, looking around the chamber at species that had once ignored her people's cries for help. "I also saw a human ship appear in that darkness. I saw strangers risk their lives to save mine. I saw hope where there should have been none." Her voice cracked slightly. "And now I see this, a chamber where my people have a voice, a galaxy where the weak are not simply meat for the strong, a future that I never dared to dream of." The chamber was silent. Many delegates had heard similar speeches before, but the emotion in Saravel's voice was impossible to ignore. "The humans gave us many things," she continued. "Shelter, safety, a chance to survive. But the greatest gift they gave us was not material. It was belief. They believed that things could change. They believed that someday, somehow, the galaxy would be ready to do better. And they were right." She turned to face Elena directly. "Secretary General Vasquez, on behalf of the Milesian people, I offer our gratitude, not just for saving us, but for trusting that we deserve to be saved, for trusting that the galaxy could learn, for trusting in a future that had not yet arrived." Elena nodded, her expression solemn. "Ambassador Saravel, on behalf of the Reformed Galactic Council, I welcome the Milesian people to their rightful place among the stars. May your voice ring loudly in these halls. May your wisdom guide us toward better choices, and may your people flourish in the light they were denied for so long." The formal vote was taken. It passed unanimously. Even the Vorthag delegation, much reduced in power after 3 years of political consequences for their past actions, voted in favor. They had learned that opposing such measures only isolated them further. After the ceremony, Elena walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime. The station had changed in many ways since her first arrival. Human influence was visible everywhere, not in flags or symbols, but in small details. Ramps alongside stairs for species that did not have legs, translation system that worked in real time for any language, medical facilities equipped to treat beings from any environment. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had offered it tools and let each species decide how to use them. She found herself at the Memorial Wall. It was a new addition to Nexus Prime, built in the first year after the Reformation. The wall listed every species that had gone extinct in recorded galactic history. Thousands of names, most of them forgotten. All of them mourned. Crystalline voice of mourning joined her there. The Selvari delegate had become something close to a friend over the past 3 years. They often met at this wall, both of them carrying the weight of history. "The crystal singers are thriving," the Selvari said. "Their population has doubled since we gave them new territory. They sing songs about the bad old days, but they also sing songs about hope. I never thought I would hear such songs from them." "They forgave you," Elena observed. "They said they understood." The crystal being's form flickered with colors that had no name in human languages. "I still do not understand it myself. My ancestors destroyed their world. We took everything from them, and they forgave us because we finally admitted we were wrong." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Humans have a saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Forgiveness is not always about the one being forgiven. Sometimes it is about freeing yourself. Your species has many such sayings. We have had many opportunities to learn them." They stood in comfortable silence, looking at the names on the wall. Finally, crystalline voice of morning asked the question that had been on her mind for years. What now, Elena? The survivor species are recognized. The council has been reformed. The Vorthak are contained. You have achieved everything you set out to achieve. What comes next? Elena smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. We keep going. We keep proving that there is another way. And eventually, we step back and let others take the lead. You would give up your position? The goal was never for humanity to rule. The goal was for the galaxy to be able to rule itself justly. She gestured at the memorial wall. Someday this wall will stop growing. Someday no more species will go extinct because no one cared enough to help them. On that day, my work will be done. In a distant corner of the galaxy, a human ship approached a world that had never been contacted before. Its people had just discovered faster-than-light travel. They had sent their first probe beyond their solar system and were waiting anxiously to see if anyone would respond. The human ship was small and unarmed. Its crew consisted of a single diplomat named James Chen, a young man who had grown up hearing stories about the Reformation and wanted to do his part. He landed his ship in an open field near the planet's largest city. The aliens gathered around it, curious and afraid in equal measure. They had detected the transmissions from the wider galaxy. They knew what was out there. They knew how dangerous the universe could be. James stepped out of his ship with his hands open and empty. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of it. First contact, the beginning of everything. One of the aliens stepped forward. It was a being covered in soft fur with large eyes designed for seeing in low light. Its voice was translated by James's equipment into understandable words. We have heard the transmissions, the alien said. We know there are powerful species out there who take what they want. We know we are small and weak. We have been preparing for war ever since we discovered we were not alone. James nodded. I understand. My species felt the same way once. Why are you here? What do you want from us? James smiled. It was the same smile Elena had worn 3 years ago when she faced the council. Confident, gentle, full of hope. I am here to tell you that you do not have to be afraid anymore. You are not alone. The alien studied him with those large eyes. And what do you want in return for protection? Only that someday, when you are strong enough, you do the same for someone else. There was a long silence. The gathered aliens looked at each other, trying to understand what they were hearing. It went against everything they had learned about the galaxy. It seemed too good to be true. You ask us to trust you, the alien finally said. How do we know you are telling the truth? James nodded slowly. He had expected this question. You do not know. You cannot know, not yet. Trust is earned through actions, not words. All I can tell you is that my species chose to believe in a better future, even when there was no evidence that such a future was possible. We were scared. We were weak. We could have hidden behind walls and hoped the universe would ignore us. He looked at the sky, at the stars that held both wonders and terrors. Instead, we chose to hope, and that choice changed everything. The alien considered this. Then slowly, it extended one of its limbs toward James. It was a gesture of greeting in their culture, a sign of trust. James took the offered limb gently. First contact was complete. Far away on Nexus Prime, Elena Vasquez felt none of this. She had no way of knowing that another first contact was happening, that another species was being offered the same choice humanity had made decades ago. But somehow, standing at the memorial wall with her crystalline friend beside her, she knew that the work was continuing. Somewhere out there, someone was extending a hand to a frightened stranger. Somewhere out there, hope was being offered to those who had never dared to dream. She looked at the wall one last time. So many names, so much loss, but fewer names being added each year. Progress measured in species that did not die. I think, she said quietly, that this is enough. I think this is worth everything we sacrificed. Crystalline voice of morning chimed softly. I think so too. They walked away together, leaving the memorial behind. Outside the viewing windows, the galaxy stretched out in all its terrible beauty. Billions of stars, countless worlds, so much potential for both cruelty and kindness. Humanity had made its choice. Now the rest of the galaxy was making theirs. And slowly, year by year, the future was becoming something worth believing in. The story was not over. It would never be over. But for the first time in galactic history, there was reason to hope that the next chapter might be better than the last. That was enough. That was everything. And somewhere in the dark between stars, a human ship flew toward another world, carrying the same message it had carried for 3 years. You are not alone. You do not have to be afraid. And someday you will pass this gift along to someone else. That was what humanity offered the galaxy. Not conquest, not power, not even protection. Just hope. And hope, it turned out, was stronger than any weapon ever built.